Brad Edwards, welcome back to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Hope you're doing well.
I'm doing well, Ryan. We got football in full swing, so how could I be doing any better?
No. And listen, Tuscaloosa, I don't know if they should be this way, but, we already booked our tickets for Santa Clara, California. But I don't know if that's early or if you think it's right on time. But pretty explosive offensive performance against Louisville.
Yeah, I guess it was everything that Kirk Herbstreit had advertised it to be, huh?
Sure.
That was what a lot of people thought might happen. And, look, Louisville's not by any stretch the best defense they'll face all year, but it was certainly a different type of offensive performance than we're used to from Alabama. And, not to pick on Jalen Hurts because, every starter Alabama's had prior to Jalen. The offense never looked like that. And so I think that's exciting to people. The possibility that there could be a whole season of it, but let's kind of take it one step at a time, and we'll see. At some point there will be growing pains. I think now that Tua's made his first start, I have a hard time believing that Louisville wasn't prepared for him to be the guy, but the more film that teams get on him, the more things they'll have. At least they'll try to disrupt him. They'll try to identify weaknesses and things like that. And so at some point it's going to get more difficult for him. It's not going to be always that easy. But with all the talent that he has around him, I like Alabama's chances of continuing to score a lot.
Well, we're talking, and maybe this is the conversation. We maybe this is that next step in evolution from Nick Saban, adapting to the current streak in college football, because something tells me this was a bigger deal that he had to deal with, a gunslinger at quarterback, to understand, okay, hey, we've got to make a shift now. But he said it to your colleague, Chris Lowe, a couple of weeks ago. We may have to score more points to win games. And so maybe it was inside. Nick Saban had to deal with that internally because it really goes against a lot of the philosophy he has from the game of football that he's been a part of for 40-plus years.
Yeah, it does, because what you're doing is by scoring quickly, you're putting your defense out there faster, which is counterintuitive to his way of coaching football. It's generally been try to milk the clock, allow the defense to stay rested. When it's possible, you just basically end every possession with a kick, right? And then if you're putting the defense in a position where the other team has to drive a long field against them, then you like your chances. Now, that's not to say that still won't happen a lot. And, I even noticed that one of the things that he focused on, I can't remember if it was immediately after the game or if it was yesterday, but, among the few things that he had to say about Tua's performance was ball security and just the way he was holding the ball. And so that's always going to be important to Saban, even if the offense is maybe more open and is scoring more quickly. That's not going to happen at the expense of protecting the football and still playing smart. And so whatever opportunities there are to work on some things that could potentially be an issue down the stretch, he's going to do those, and certainly that's one that he'll hope he can kind of coach out of Tua without it compromising some of the things that he does well.
On Alabama's defense, and tell me, let's throw away 2007, even though it's not really fair to do that. They're still part of the numbers. But I've made a comment. I want to see if you can back me up. If this offense continues to produce, if the defense can equal, at least match Nick Saban's worst defense in Tuscaloosa, then I think this is where this team – because defensively, I still don't know about this team. I have some questions about a lot of different areas. But if they can equal at least Nick Saban's worst defense in Tuscaloosa, I think they'll be a national champ. But still some growing pains on that defensive side of the football.
Yeah, I look at this stuff from an efficiency standpoint, not from a raw yardage or point standpoint or even yards or points per game. And so there are a lot of other things that are being looked at, including pace, including turnovers, things like that. But when you look at all of it, like you said, throw out 2007, the worst defense he's had has still been top 10 nationally, and so that's kind of the way I'm thinking about it. Is that if this team ends up improving as the year goes on that side of the ball, and there's no reason to think that they won't. If they end up being anywhere close to what Alabama has typically been on defense, combined with a much better offense, then I think the team overall could be as good of a team as he's had, and that's obviously saying something. And so I think that's kind of what we're looking at. And look, if you're anyone in college football who fancies yourself a contender for the national championship and would conceivably have to go through Alabama to get there, then the one thing you're hoping is that defense is not going to get much better. Because we did see some things that we don't always see from Alabama, even in season openers, which is some receivers running wide open against that defense, and that's obviously something that has to get fixed. I would say that throughout the first half, maybe the pressure on the Louisville quarterback was not what we've been accustomed to seeing. He did have a little bit more time to throw early on in the game, not so much late. And so look, there's going to be a learning curve, especially with all the new faces in the secondary. But tell you what, that little bit of starting experience that Thompson got at the end of last year, I think is paying dividends here, because he certainly is the guy they're leaning on back there in the secondary, and looks like a guy who's just going to kind of follow in the long line of safeties who've made a lot of big plays for Alabama. And so he might not have much experience, but he's got enough to be a weapon back there. And at the moment, they still got at least one big time playmaker on every level of that defense, which is more than most teams in the country can say.
Well, and I thought it was unique, not saying that I'm going to take the other side, but Nick Saban was asked yesterday to evaluate Tosh LaPoy in his first ever call as a coordinator, and he pretty much refused to do that. He said he didn't evaluate coaching.
That, yeah.
And I'm like, okay, now think about this. If it would have been great, wouldn't Nick Saban have said it would have been great? And he chose not to do that, and he said, we all kind of work as a team around here. And I thought, even, for my layman's eyes, it looked okay. But for those who specialize in attacking defenses, there may have been something there that created a lot of vulnerability.
Yeah, I think that's probably a fair assessment. In fact, when Louisville tacked on that meaningless touchdown late against the backup defense, I think a lot of people kind of had the reaction like, hey, that was a cheap touchdown. And if Saban had known that they were going to keep their starters in and throw the ball, he probably wouldn't have gone run, punt on the previous possession that Alabama had. But I think if you watch the game, 14 points is probably a pretty fair assessment of the way that Louisville moved the ball against Alabama's defense. They had some good drives at other points in the game that didn't result in points. And so I think 14 is probably about right, given the way that the Alabama defense played. And even against a team that has some good talent offensively, that's still a lot for Alabama fans to be used to giving up. And so there definitely are some things that a team like Arkansas State this week, and certainly Ole Miss next week, will see in that film, and they will believe that they can exploit. And so I think in addition to some issues in the secondary that they've got to get fixed, they've got to be consistently getting more pressure on the opposing quarterback, because that, as we all know, will make up for some deficiencies in coverage. You can certainly cover guys for 3 seconds a lot more easily than you can cover them for 5 seconds. And so I think it kind of starts up front, but certainly guys in the secondary learning their assignments and not busting coverages is going to be a big part of what Alabama has to figure out defensively over these next few weeks.
Outside of Alabama, give me the next best thing that you saw on Saturday, or any, college football game, maybe a team that jumped out and you say, wow, this team can be a big-time contender. Anything out there that grabbed you?
Yeah, there definitely wasn't anybody that jumped out on the level of Alabama. I guess I'd have to go with Ohio State. I was not surprised that they just steamrolled Oregon State the way they did. They were obviously a huge favorite in that game, even without Urban Meyer there. In fact, I thought that everything that had happened off the field would probably motivate them more than it would hurt them, at least in this first game. We'll see as we go through the next 2 weeks. And I think especially week 3, the final game that Urban is out when they take on TCU in Arlington, that'll be the real test as to, okay, how does Ohio State match up with a legit top 20 team, maybe not a top 10 team, but a legit top 20. And it'll give you an idea of, how vulnerable they may be once they get into conference play. So we'll wait for next week to see that. But, I think Ohio State and Oklahoma, let me be fair and not leave Oklahoma out of this, because Florida Atlantic, their conference affiliation aside, was a very good team at the end of last year. And even though they were having to break in a new quarterback, for an Oklahoma defense that did not look good most of last year, to hold them scoreless for as long as they did, I think suggests that Oklahoma might be improved defensively, and that is a good thing for them if they are, because as good as Kyler Murray may be capable of being, he will not be as good as Baker Mayfield. Kyler Murray is going to be a one-year thing, and then he's off to baseball. And in his first year as a full-time starting quarterback in college, he will not be as good as Baker Mayfield was in his third year or fourth year, depending on whether you want to count that Texas Tech one. And so Oklahoma's offense will not be quite as good as it was a year ago, but if their defense is better, then I think overall the team might be just as good. And we saw last year how close they came to beating Georgia, and so they were. I think what we saw on Saturday is that Oklahoma is still a team to contend with as far as the national championship race goes.
Hey, Brad, what's your assignment this weekend?
We will be in Bristol. We're not going on the road this week, and so we have actually a strange show. We have a split show. We're going to go from noon to 3 Eastern, and then we're going to allow the country to get the national broadcast of the Georgia-South Carolina game, and then we'll come back after the game and do 4 more hours at night. And so we'll get to watch games when we're off the air, and obviously we always watch them when we're on the air too. And we'll have plenty to talk about because there are a few big games. That one's obviously a huge one in the SEC, but then I guess it's still technically in the SEC. Clemson going against A&M. I think is really interesting because if you look at Clemson's schedule in light of what some of the other ACC teams did this weekend, you could make a great argument that this might be the toughest test they have all season going into College Station. We'll certainly learn more as the weeks progress, but right now I would think A&M could be as good as any of the other teams in the ACC, and so Clemson. Certainly nothing happened in week 1 to cause you to change your feeling that they have a cakewalk through the ACC, because the rest of that conference didn't look very good.
But do you feel like that Jimbo Fisher can put up a hurdle? I mean, can he do it this quick?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, look, you have to be good on the offensive line and good at quarterback to be able to combat that defensive front, because so much of it is going to be good decision making, and most of the time blocks aren't going to be made, and you're going to have to get the ball out quickly to the right places. And so I don't think a relatively inexperienced quarterback is going to be able to do much against that defense. But the one chance I would give them is that Clemson seems to be trying to figure out what it wants to do at quarterback. And they're not as far along as Alabama is in that category, because they've got a true freshman who has not played much, but they seem pretty set on the idea that he needs to be part of the mix. And whether they're messing with Kelly Bryant's confidence by doing this remains to be seen. So I can see the possibility that Bryant isn't sharp, and if Lawrence goes out there and has a bad game in his first experience against a hostile crowd, maybe with a few turnovers, A&M could get some points and have a chance. But unless Clemson's offense helps them, I can't see them pulling this upset.
ESPN College Football Insider Analyst for College Game Day on ESPN Radio, that you hear right here on Tide 102.9 and throughout the country on College Game Day on ESPN Radio, part of ESPN Stats and Information Group. Best way to connect with Brad Edwards is Brad Edwards on the Twitter account. Follow his great work at ESPN.com as well, and a lot of information coming out of Bristol. Brad, as always, thank you for your time. I hope you have a great week.
All right, you too, Ryan. Take care.